I gotta say, this is awful that Diddy owes his life to Mark Agnifilo, literally his life, because he could have gotten life in prison were it not for Mark Agnifilo.
You can always tell when someone who believed they were untouchable experiences real fear for the first time. It changes everything. The confidence disappears. The way they walk changes. The way they speak changes. Even the way they carry themselves tells a different story. Suddenly, every move is more cautious, every word more calculated, and every glance reveals the fear they can no longer.
His defense lawyer, who had a brilliant strategy, and Diddy screwed him over when he hired this videographer to chronicle his life without telling Mark Agnifilo that when Diddy and Mark were on the phone, this videographer was recording what Mark clearly expected to be an attorney-client privileged relationship. Now, it is true that the client holds that privilege, the lawyer doesn't, but Mark's clear expectation was that this was a private conversation. These were private conversations, and that he and Diddy could talk openly, and Mark could talk to Diddy not just as a client, but as a person, and tried to guide him in a time leading up to his arrest. And unbeknownst to Mark Agnifilo, Diddy has got this guy recording the conversation as he's sitting there saying, "You are screwing this up. You are messing up this case. We're losing." And knowing that that's on tape. And it's almost like he's performing for the camera and not telling Mark what's going on. And the really enraging part about it is that Mark Agnifilo won this case for Diddy with legal strategy. It wasn't just an accident that this jury that had heard all of this in the news before the trial voted not guilty on all the serious charges. It was Mark Agnifilo that did that. Yet Diddy secretly records this guy and embarrasses him. And yeah, you could say, well, Diddy never expected that it would end up being broadcast somewhere else. Well, okay, but Diddy was planning on using it, or he wouldn't have had it recorded in the first place. So it's just really, really unfair. And I know that in a way this sounds crazy, that I'm getting so upset about Diddy, and yet there's video of Diddy beating Cassie. Well, that's horrendous, but that doesn't mean you can't look at something else as well. And I just think, as a lawyer, I just think this is just so outrageous that he would do something like this, and not even understanding what Agnifilo's legal theory was. Because I will tell you that when we did our first documentary on Diddy, which was 8 months before the trial, Mark Agnifilo said to me on camera that he is going to tell this jury that this was a successful black man that prosecutors were trying to take down because they couldn't get into his bank accounts because they were clean, and he couldn't deal with they couldn't deal with taxes because he wasn't committing tax fraud. So they go into his bedroom. And that's what Mark Agnifilo said 8 months before. And he goes into the trial and he essentially wins that argument. Whether you believe it or not, a jury that sat through the whole thing, they believed it. And ultimately they convicted him on this BS Mann Act thing. So Diddy won that case. And one of the reasons he won the case is something that Agnifilo got criticized for. That when he did the documentary with me, he was making a joke about the baby oil. Remember, he said, "Oh, well, I didn't know he bought in bulk. He must have bought 1,000 bottles at Costco." And a lot of people just slammed him for that and said, how...
Even the way they scan a room starts to change, as though every shadow could be hiding the next threat. That's the kind of pressure that can unravel even the most carefully crafted image. The person at the center of the storm appears to be struggling to hold together a reputation built on power, secrecy, and control, but the silence is beginning to crack. The walls that once seemed unbreakable no longer look so secure. And the people who once stood firmly in their corner are starting to step away. The biggest turning point came when the lawyer walked away, not with a quiet exit or a carefully managed transition, but in a way that fueled even more questions. To many observers, it suggested the legal battles had become increasingly serious, complex, and difficult to navigate. When someone whose profession is handling high-stakes legal challenges decides it's time to step aside, people naturally begin to wonder what comes next. That's often when the perception of control starts to fade and the sense of uncertainty begins to grow. From the outside, the public image may still project confidence through carefully timed appearances, brief statements, and reassuring messages. But maintaining that image becomes increasingly difficult as scrutiny continues to intensify.
Risky for them to put Christina Korum on the stand, I think.
There was so much being said about your client in that trial, obviously in the media, facing a number of different lawsuits. We also wondered whether or not he, and it's his decision alone, whether he wanted to take the stand and give his story, tell his story, give his version of events. Obviously, there are a ton of risks that come with putting a defendant on the stand, but it would be his choice. Was there a conversation about that?
Well, I mean, I can't get into, attorney-client privilege conversations. Obviously he thought about it, decided not to. And, as I indicated earlier, we thought the case had gone in really well for us. And so we liked where we were. So that was basically the decision.
Now, the big news, a lot of big news came out after the trial, was the firing of Maureen Comey, the lead prosecutor in this case. Now, there's obviously a political angle to it. There are comments that she has made. But I have to ask, you going head to head against her for so many weeks, months and before that, the firing of her, what did you make of that?
I think it was unfortunate. She's a very well-respected prosecutor. We had good sort of professional relationships with her during the course of the trial. And, I don't really think it had anything to do with the trial, but I can't really say anything beyond that. It just,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's talk about something we can get into quite a bit. Let's talk bail. Okay, so we did a previous sidebar breaking down the defense's renewed motion for release, several arguments for why Sean Combs, should be released on bail pending sentencing, acquitted of the most serious charges. There's no comparable case of someone who is convicted of the Mann Act alone and not engaging in sex trafficking or a prostitution for financial gain, and they would be locked up like this. Talked about the issues plaguing the MDC, how it is dangerous, how he's not a risk of flight, not a danger to the community. But do you think Judge Arun Subramanian is going to be persuaded by your letter, by your motion? Because obviously he specifically highlighted after the verdict your client's violence, how the defense asserted at trial that Combs was violent. Do you think he's going to have a change of opinion now based upon the legal papers?
Well, I think we certainly hope so. And, as we pointed out in the papers, the unfortunate violence that occurred was mostly a really long time ago, other than the one incident in June that Jane testified to, which was kind of unusual. They had been together for 3 years. There had been no violence, and she essentially started the fight. I'm not excusing anything, but it was kind of a one-off, and I think the government really hadn't put in any evidence of any recent violence. The Intercontinental video, remember, that was almost 10 years ago. He broke up with Cassie in 2018. And in our reply papers yesterday, we submitted a letter from Gina Hyun, who was one of the alleged victims, a different ex-girlfriend. And I think it was a pretty powerful letter about how Sean has changed, how she's not concerned about violence. She thinks he should be released on bail. So we're hoping that that will persuade the judge, given everything else, particularly, as you noted, like the really, really unusual nature of this particular Mann Act conviction and the fact that he's already been in prison, or jail rather, for like 11 months. This case.
You can almost hear the strain in the voice. The tension shows in every expression, every rigid movement, every carefully measured appearance. The pressure becomes harder to conceal, and the cracks are beginning to show. Then comes the moment that changes everything. The person expected to manage the legal storm steps away. That's when the image of total control begins to fade. Legal teams don't usually walk away from high-profile clients without serious consideration. Their role is to navigate complex disputes, manage risk, shape public responses, and help their clients through intense scrutiny. So when a key attorney exits during a turbulent period, it inevitably raises questions about what may lie ahead. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere can feel increasingly tense. Long meetings, constant phone calls, urgent discussions, and endless attempts to find a path forward become the new routine. Every development carries new uncertainty. Every headline creates fresh pressure. The search for answers grows more desperate as familiar strategies become less effective and the room for maneuver continues to shrink.
This is a one-off to begin with, but we're not aware of any case like this with a Mann Act conviction where anyone's done that much time to begin with. So.
And prosecutors, I'm imagining, have come back or will come back and say, well, listen, look, after the raids on his property, he engaged, or what they would say, he allegedly engaged in criminal activity and, obviously violence, they say, with Jane. But they say, look, what was in his hotel room when he was picked up in New York. They made allegations of what he was trying to do while he was in the MDC, whether it was using other inmates' phone privileges to have three-way phone calls. That was litigated before trial. What would be your response to say, you make the point that he is a changed person. The violence that was shown during the course of this trial is from years ago. But how would you convince the judge to say, listen, we are being truthful, we are being honest, we are being forefront, that he really is a different human being? Because the judge, again, this was right after the verdict and didn't have an opportunity for a briefing schedule. How can you make the argument that he is different and that he should be trusted?
Well, I think the point you mentioned about the arrest, unfortunately, Sean has struggled with drug addiction for a long time. And I think one of the good things and positive things that has come out of his incarceration is given him an opportunity, to rehabilitate. He's committed to continuing that. He's committed to a long-term program of therapy and helping with the domestic violence problem that he's had in the past. So, at a certain point, you have to just, maybe it is a leap of faith, but you have to just give a person another chance. And he really is committed to change and to there being a new chapter of service on his part. So, I think we have to hope that the judge will agree with that. And I think we've made a strong case for that.
Do you know when the judge might make a decision on bail?
We don't know.
Okay. If he denies release again, does that give you a sense of what sentencing could be like? Now, to be clear, my understanding is Judge Arun Subramanian even said at the point, if I make a decision on release, it's not indicative of where I'm leaning towards sentencing. I know there's a pre-sentencing investigation still being conducted or has been conducted. There's a lot of factors to consider. But I have to ask about whether this is going to, have an effect on sentencing. Do you believe it's going to have an effect on sentencing? Does it give you a preview of where the judge is lining up? Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you are probably going to be arguing for time served, maybe a minimum of 21 to 27 months. Where do you think the judge is going to go here?
Yeah, I think that you have to take each step at a time and that the judge is not going to prejudge that. There's a lot more information he needs to get, not only the pre-sentence report, but we're going to make a very fulsome sentencing submission. And he's going to have, a much more detailed picture. Even, the trial was about the charges, right? And he doesn't have the full picture of all the factors about Sean's life that he's going to consider. There's going to be a big fight about the sentencing guidelines. We think actually we're going to end up arguing for an even lower guideline range than we had originally believed at the time of the verdict, where we didn't have we had like a couple of hours to try to figure out what to say about bail. So, I hope the judge will grant bail, but I feel confident that even if he doesn't, it doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to sentence Sean to time served. He's going to take everything into account when he gets all the submissions. And, I've got a lot of confidence that the judge